Hello and welcome to The Stack. This week we review a new weekly series from the New York Times, a magazine that is all about passion and Monocle's collaboration with Italian luxury house Gucci. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show talking about a new weekly series from the New York Times titled The Interview. And it is exactly what it says, an in-depth conversation with a relevant person, from a marine biologist to a Hollywood star. The conversation is hosted every week by David Marchese and Lulu Garcia-Navarro, and it is featured in their podcast and also in print inside the New York Times Magazine. I had the pleasure to speak with both David and Lulu on the art of a good interview and a bit more about the interview.
There were all sorts of different ways that the New York Times interviewed people. You have the profile, you have what David was doing before, which was talk, which was a written Q&A. But the idea between joining David and I together was to reach all the different ways that people consume the Times. So in audio, in print, digitally, eventually even maybe on YouTube and video. So really trying to take these people that are so fascinating, so seminal, who want to speak with the New York Times and actually be able to put it out into the world in all these different ways.
And David, do you think there was something missing, perhaps not only on the New York Times, but for a proper in-depth interview, something that you can really delve into the life of someone, being a musician, a politician? I generally think that I think the world of media was craving for something like the interview.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously no shortage of interview podcasts, but I think maybe where there was a gap was, in the idea that there was an interview that could happen that combines both a sense of journalistic rigor and sort of a more kind of intimate, free-flowing conversational form. It seems to me that those things were generally divided. You had interviews that either did one or the other. Just speaking for myself, I think Lulu and I are doing a really nice job of kind of combining those two styles into one program in a way that no one else has really been doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about politicians in particular, or you think about celebrities, it often seems like you have the cozy chat show, right, where celebrities are interviewing celebrities, and they don't really get asked terribly difficult questions. And the amount of research that, for example, David does, and me, in advance of these interviews, where you really are trying to ask people questions that are going to push beyond very familiar narratives, beyond the film that they might be promoting, to get to know them, to get to know really what infuses their art. And then politicians, equally, I don't think we give them, I would call the celebrity treatment, which is to say, beyond your positions, who are you and why are you this way? What animates your political beliefs? What is it that makes you care about these particular issues? And in our New York Times way, with a lot of rigor and a lot of, journalistic ethics, and really just kind of trying to get people to really talk in honest and revealing ways.
Lulu, it's interesting to see, who are you both interviewing as well? Because I think that's the secret of the success of something like the interview as well, because you need an interesting mix of people. We had Anne Hathaway. The latest one, I got to be honest, I didn't know much about Charlemagne. And what an interesting character, and quite political as well. Apparently a lot of people would trust anything he would say. So tell us about, how do you guys see this mix of potential, interviewees for the interview?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, it's something that Lulu alluded to earlier, where, we're really just trying to find fascinating people who can speak in interesting ways, either about themselves or about the world at large. And often that has to do with going beyond sort of the immediate news hook that maybe other interview shows or other outlets might feel tethered to, and trying to get under a second layer of meaning or importance. So that's kind of broadly speaking who we're talking to. But then, in addition to that, we really are looking for a mix. We don't want to just speak to politicians or just speak to actors. So for example, the episode we have coming up this Saturday is with a marine biologist named Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who talks very movingly about climate and how we should think about the climate crisis. But then looking further ahead, we have novelists, we have directors, we have comedians.
Ed Sarandos, the head of Netflix, for example, business people. I mean, people who have something to say about the way I think we're living our lives. Like that to me is the animating critique. The interview that David has with Ayanna, I didn't know of her. And then when I read this interview, I mean, the things that she has to say are questions that I really have about this moment and the way that we're engaging with the climate. And I found it very compelling, especially when she said basically anyone who owns beachfront property might as well burn their cash. I was like, I've been saying that to my family in Miami for years. Nobody listens.
And one thing, actually, I liked the interview. I mean, I know you both mentioned that there's a visual element to it, and it looks great. It looks very New York Times. It's not just simply a new podcast. I mean, it is on the magazine every week, I believe. So tell us a bit more about that side as well. So it's not just an interview. There's a whole production level to it as well.
I wish we could take credit for that, Lulu. We work with a very, very talented group of designers and photo editors, and they really tried and I think succeeded in coming up with a distinct look for the interview.
So what you have there are video portraits, and they're sort of moving images that are meant to capture something about that person that maybe just a single portrait can't capture. So it really is trying to move the idea of the portrait forward so that you are visually also learning something about maybe the way the person sees themselves or the way that they're going to be portrayed in the interview. And I think this to me is the magic of the New York Times, and specifically the New York Times Magazine, where this franchise has its home. There's something I don't know that any other place could quite do this and quite pull this off, because you have this journalistic enterprise, but then it's just gorgeous, right? I mean, I have to say, all the people that we have been interacting with, celebrities, politicians, they are really loving that part of it because, again, it's showing their full selves. It's not just this one-dimensional or two-dimensional portrayal. It really is capturing this more full sense of who they are in the world.
And I was wondering, I mean, maybe so far you've been very lucky with your guests and they've been very open, but it must be quite challenging sometimes doing an in-depth interview, even if the person is interesting, because the person might be a bit cold, more reserved. I mean, what are the tips actually for someone, even for someone like me, for someone who does interviews with other people? Do you have any techniques? Because people behave in different ways when they're being interviewed.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and it's one I think about a lot. And sometimes I think I come up with an answer, and I'm really saying something that I just figured out after the fact, and like whether or not I'm actually deploying that in the moment is like a different question. But I think there are things that you can do to make someone more at ease. I think if you early in an interview, for example, ask questions that really demonstrate a strong knowledge of the subject matter, I think that helps indicate to the interviewee that you're a serious person who takes them and their work seriously. I think there's a lot of sort of intangible interpersonal kind of dynamics that are at work, and you can manage those, like eye contact or sort of the responses you give, or how you signal that you're listening, or how you might prompt them to go further into an answer. Those can help set someone at ease. There are a lot of things like that. But, the other thing I would say too is, it's not necessarily the case that your job is to set someone at ease. Your job is to ask the questions and try and get at the information that you think is most interesting to you and your readers. And I think there's like a natural inclination to think like, if the subject seems uncomfortable, I'm doing something wrong. When the truth is, maybe if the subject seems a little uncomfortable, it's more a sign that you're doing something right. So it's kind of just like what your perspective is on the conversation, both going into it and during it, that I think really dictates a lot of that. But I know Lulu has thoughts about this as well.
And Lulu, just to pitch in as well a little bit on this, I mean, especially when it comes to celebrities, I mean, I see more and more, PRs are scared, maybe because of social media. They ask, can you send questions in advance? I mean, and it's funny, even from a place like the New York Times, which is definitely not a place where it's going to be gossipy or do any type of slander against the artists. But PRs are so scared these days, right? That must be another challenge, especially when it comes to celebrities.
I don't know that they're scared. I think that a lot of, and this is true of politicians, this is true of celebrities, this is true of me, by the way. I mean, nowadays, information gets disseminated in all sorts of different ways. It gets cut up. You don't really, we could do a nuanced, wonderful interview, like with Charlemagne. He was talking about this in our interview, where, you know, you get a real sense of his complex beliefs, and then part of that is going to get cut up and dissected and pushed out. So people are naturally understand the ecosystem and are wary of the ecosystem. And so there is, I think, an inbuilt caution because of the world that we live in now about that. I see my job not as trying to get a gotcha moment. I don't see my job as trying to get a news-making moment. I see my job as really trying to understand in a real way the way that someone sees the world. And so I mean, certainly there are always caveats that people want to put in saying like, I'd rather not be asked about this. I don't want to talk about that. And obviously at the New York Times, that is just, we never give questions in advance. To be clear, we never agree to limits on the interview. And in fact, if people want to place limits on the interview, we won't do the interview. That is just journalistic practice at the New York Times. And they're not involved in the edit, needless to say.
Would you ever do an interview, you two, with someone, or is that a possibility?
Oh, the two of us together?
Yeah.
Sure. I think it would be sort of, you'd have to figure out like actually how the dynamics of that work. And so it wouldn't feel like we're like good cop, bad cop, or like tag team.
I get to be bad cop. Sure. I like being bad cop. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. When we were coming up with this, David and I are very different types of interviewers. And I've learned a lot from watching David, I will say. And so I think one of the things that we were wondering was, how was this going to sound when you have two very different types of interviewers actually trading off every week and doing these kinds of interviews? And I think what we've discovered is that instead of trying to sound more like each other, it is refreshing to have these two very distinct types of interviews. And what we've also found is when we're talking about guests, I'm very clear that like, I think that David would do a better job with that guest. You know, it's very clear to me the kind of guest that David, I think I would do fine. Not to say that I wouldn't, but I sometimes see David has a real affinity. He has a real strength. He's done that kind of person before. I'm interested to hear him have that conversation. And I would say I've heard him say the similar thing about me, where we're talking about a guest and he said, you know what, I think Lulu might do a better job with that. And that feels amazing. Like that feels very clarifying.
Lulu does all the hard ones. I do the easy ones. She does the ones that matter.
That's not true. I find celebrities very hard to interview. I give me a politician any day. I find celebrities often very difficult to interview. And I actually think they really do matter, because I think that they impact our culture and the way we think in lots of different ways.
And talking about celebrities, funnily enough, I really, really enjoyed, David, the debut of the interview as well, your interview with Anne Hathaway. I think she's just a fascinating, actress. I think there's something quite refreshing about her. I don't know. I never met her in person. How was it to chat with her, actually, for the very first interview?
It's a funny question, because often people will say to me, like, oh, how was talking to that person? And I think, like, well, you saw the interview. Like,
yes.
So I think, like, my experience ideally is the listener or the reader's experience. And that's kind of what I'm trying to convey. Like, I'm a proxy in many ways for the audience. So I think the way Anne Hathaway came across to you is probably the same way she came across to me, which is a smart, thoughtful person who has really been burned by being a public figure as well, and is sort of struggling with, or has an ongoing sort of struggle with understanding like how much of herself she actually wants to put out there in the world at any given moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's the weird thing about an interview, right? I just did Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and who has her own podcast and is herself an interviewer. And I was talking to her about that tension that often, especially with, I think, celebrities, but also politicians, anyone who has stakes, they want to give a good interview, but they don't want to go viral for the wrong reasons. They don't want to be taken out of context. They have a whole bunch of different calculations. And then we, as the interviewer, want them to be revealing, want to pull things out of them that perhaps they haven't said before. So there is a natural kind of tension there that we have different goals in what we're doing. And I often find it can be invigorating, that kind of dynamic, if it's right. And sometimes it can feel a little awkward. And so it's the luck of the draw.
Thank you, Lulu, Garcia-Navarro, and David Marchese there. You can read and listen to the interview on nytimes.com or buy the Sunday edition of the New York Times in the US. The guest for this weekend's interview is marine biologist Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. And now to a title that we're all fans here at Monocle, A Passion Thing, printed and bound in Austria. Their 10th issue is a celebratory one. It marks 5 years since their first issue as well. The magazine excels in interviewing different people driven by passion, be it a professional basketball player from Slovenia or our very own editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. Once again, I had the pleasure to speak with A Passion Thing editor-in-chief Karin Novozamsky and creative director Sandra Reichl.
It's such a beautiful thing to do, to think about the content and what kind of stories we pick to bring them to the world and to our readers. It's always an incredible journey.
And in terms of content, it's always fascinating the people you choose and feature. And of course, I have to say that Monocle's very own Tyler Brûlé is featured. I really enjoyed the interview. He doesn't do, jet lagging that much. That's very interesting to know. But what makes a person to be featured at A Passion Thing? Do they need to be passionate about what they do? They need to be interesting. It must be quite a selection, right? In terms of this editorially, right? Who would you choose to be featured?
To be honest, the list is endless. I mean, the list started in even before the first issue, and the list never grew smaller. It only grew bigger. And I mean, we sometimes talk about what is the outline to make a person or a story of a person fit our magazine. But in the end, I think they come in with a very specific spirit and vibe that we are attracted to. And then the stories most of the times are never usual. And I don't want to sound cliche because there's hardly any story that is alike, but there are always twists and turns, no matter if it was the start, during the career. But I mean, the combination of things is definitely that they're driven, that they're very motivated, that they wake up and like what they do. They're very realistic in that they're not going to love it every day. But I feel like it's a mix of things, and most people have interesting stories. They are just not telling it. So I think we also shine a light on people that are maybe not the most famous in their segment or market. But I personally like the twists. I really like the twists within the stories, no matter if somebody changed careers completely, no matter if it's the end of the world, but they make the business fly. They're super independent in terms of ideas, processes. And I feel like we always find something interesting within a story. But of course, they have to be, it's like falling in love. There has to be a initial attraction to some extent. And then we go from there. And the deeper you dive and the more you get to know people, the more interesting the story gets, I feel like.
I agree about the initial attraction thing, because you need to be, passionate about your subject in a way. And Sandra, I want to ask, there's been perhaps a subtle change, but correct me if I'm wrong. Now, the magazine is a passion thing, but before it's a passion thing. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that's also a good question for Karin because I executed the design. But I think the internal stuff is very structural and very pragmatic. Our design and brand agency is called A Passion Thing. We released a product that is called It's a Passion Thing for 5 years. We are striving for clarity and easiness, and that's why we really realized we need to boil it down to just one name and one thing, because people don't like having,
It was too confusing.
Confusions. So we clarified it within our system, and also for the reader. I don't think that a lot of people noticed even, but thanks for pointing out.
I've noticed.
So it's pragmatic, but we love to build our ecosystem. And I think that's the driver. The driving force behind it is that we love to tell stories, and the product is the magazine, but we do work with our clients and we do it as passionately as we publish the magazine.
And Karin, we're talking about, we mentioned, Tyler is featured in the new issue. What the other characters that we can expect? Give us a little preview. It's really an interesting mix of people. You have this Slovenian basketball player, a father and daughter from Japan. But give us a little preview for this very special edition of A Passion Thing.
Yeah, we are very proud that we have, of course, again, some people from Austria, like the amazing Carla Rumler, who was like the cultural director of Swarovski, which is a known brand probably worldwide. And it was amazing talking to her, who is like now she's
Retired.
She's retired, but she had such an amazing life and met all the big designers and worked with the big photographers and back in the days. And that was an amazing interview that we could do. Or Robert Thiemann, who founded another magazine, the Frame magazine, which is amazing, also came up with an award and did amazing things in the architectural and interior design field. And after 26 years, he decided to start afresh and started a consultancy. And we think this is very brave. And that was also a very inspiring conversation to have, to understand how this process was of letting go of his child and bringing something new to the world.
A story that really resonated with me was the one about the phone booths in Rio, that I had no idea that it was a Sino-Brazilian architect that actually have found them, because they're so iconic to the country in a way. That was super, super interesting.
Yeah, that's a beautiful artist feature that we have of the artist Martin Ogolter, who is also Austrian, but he used to live in New York and now lives in Brazil for already a very long time. And he's working very freely, very different scopes of his work. And this is one of his photography works. And we also thought, wow, that's very nice to have in the magazine to tell the story. Because I think a lot of people, don't know. And it's a shame because they will disappear. This is why he did this.
They
beautiful...
will. I'm worried. Another thing I noticed, perhaps Sandra, maybe you can mention this, a lot of interesting collaborations with some of your clients. I know that you have your own A5 book as well, which is fantastic. But tell us about this collaboration process. I have a feeling that as everything you do, it's with passion. So it's with people and brands that you identify, that you might be a perfect suit for the magazine in a way.
Yeah, I think it's like another layer that if we talk to people and we find out about their story and what they're capable of and what they love to do, that of course we talk about their babies, their products, their ideas, plans, and then just things align and fall in place. And we never just wanted to come up with merch or products that are like nice quality, nicely branded. But we also want to go the full way in terms of if we collaborate, then we collaborate mostly with people we might have come across through an interview or through a recommendation of an interviewee. And then we start the conversation, and out of the conversation, there sometimes comes a product, no matter if it's like a notebook or our blanket. And sometimes it's just the interview. But either way, it's just an extension of what we want to promote, that there is so many hidden gems out there, that there are so many people really driving for amazing quality. And even if it's like a small brand you don't know, they mostly have crazy ideas of what we could do. So the notebook with Leuchtturm was one of them. The blanket with like an illustrator and producer in the US was another. Maybe we're going to come out with a third one, fourth one. But it's not really planned, as in we have to release 10 products a year. That's like a luxury we keep to ourselves to be like, okay, that feels right. That's a good product. That's what we want to include into our ecosystem. And it also should make sense in terms of, okay, a notebook is also nice to travel with. You can write down your notes, no matter if you're reading our magazine or if you're thinking about new ideas, new careers. If you want to snuggle up quietly and in peace on your couch with or without our magazine, the blanket is a super good companion. So it should also make sense in terms of what we release. It's not just we don't want to produce stuff for the sake of producing nice stuff.
That's perfect, and that's how it should be. And Karin, you were mentioning before that, there are a lot of Austrian incredible characters in the magazine. And one particularly, I know is a little note at the end of the magazine, you celebrate a few of the newsstands or bookstores, around the world. But I was curious about one from Vienna. I believe it's called Soft Cover. You're giving me some ideas for the stack as well,
Yes, Softcover, they just opened in September, I guess. We know Sebastian, who is doing it, and so we were part of the store from the beginning. And it's a shame because in Vienna, which is the biggest city in Austria, there are no really good magazine stores. And so he really filled the gap, and we were awaiting it, and we are super happy that he's doing it.
And he's doing great, by the way, because people were in need of it. You can tell that he's thriving, and it's like there are people all the time. He's doing events all the time. He's bringing in fresh ideas of how a store like this has to be, contribute to the community. So yeah, it's awesome. And it was missed. Yes. Like in such a big country like ours, in Austria, we hardly have great magazine stores, which is a pity.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Thank you, Karin Novozamsky and Sandra Reichl. Issue 10 of A Passion Thing is out now. Do check their website on apassionthingmagazine.com. And finally on the show, great talking to Monocle's editor Josh Fannett on Monocle's collaboration with Italian luxury house Gucci. The collaboration involved a takeover of the Monocle Café till the end of the month, plus a special Monocle guide to London that was given to all attendees of Gucci's cruise show in London's Tate Modern earlier this week. Here is Josh with more on the collaboration.
We're doing an amazing collaboration with Gucci. Anyone who's sauntered down Chiltern Street past our cafe will have seen a beautiful Ancora Rosso red awning. They'll have seen the cafe cups. They'll see photography from around London. And this, of course, is because Gucci's creative director, Sabato De Sarno, has decided to do the company's very first cruise show in London to celebrate all of the things, Fernando, that perhaps you and I love about the city. All of its creative discourse, all of its good bits, its bad bits, its rough bits and its smooth bits. And what better way than to make a guidebook? So Gucci came to us and said, we would like Monocle's take on the city, but we'd like to feed in some of our own ideas about what makes London hum, what makes it special. And in what I can only describe as a roller coaster 3 or 4 weeks, we managed to deliver that 160-page guide, a beautiful glossy cover, very limited print run. So this is one of the things that we're discussing on the stack that unfortunately people aren't probably going to be able to all get their hands on, although I do believe there are some copies left at the cafe on Chiltern Street if you buy a copy of Monocle. But as you say, it was for attendees of the show that took place recently at the Tate Modern. The whole place was taken over, and there's a couple of different things going on here. An interesting time for Gucci's business, some lower profits or lower anticipated profits coming in, a lot for this creative director to prove, but also a lot of critical praise for how he's brought the brand back down to earth. Looks to be turning those profit warnings around.
The thing that interests me is the fact that it's London. I mean, we're heading to Copenhagen, São Paulo, Sydney, Paris, all over the place here at Monocle. But it's quite interesting that we are here at the city that we all live in, right? Our headquarters are here in London. Was that quite nice project to do? Because perhaps you go to your local restaurant or, I don't know.
A dirty, grimy, grey old London. Well,
yes.
Not particularly. I think it would have been okay.
Is your local in there, Josh?
It would have been okay if it was in the Maldives or something for the reporting element. But I tell you what, it's a vote of confidence in London. We saw Chanel did their show in Manchester not long ago. The UK, we're very good at talking ourselves down, and there are plenty of reasons to do that, mainly our politicians. But actually, there's lots of great things about the UK and about London. And the Gucci story is kind of interesting. The magnificently named founder of Gucci, do you know his name?
No, you have to tell me now.
Guccio Gucci.
I love that.
He's a Tuscan. He's not Irish. Don't worry about that erroneous O in the middle. But he worked at the Savoy down on the Strand in the 1920s, and he worked as a bellboy. So he was carrying people's luggage, and he was in and out of this red lift. And actually, you can see some of the design cues that he took when he went back to Florence and set up the brand. So it's not a homecoming as such for Gucci, but it is a revisiting of a place where an important figure in its past sought inspiration. And I think the message is very much that the new creative director is going back to some of those messages, the craft, the observing of character and life, of high society, of low culture as well. And the guide is really a guidebook. It's the best things to do in the city. There's also a really beautiful map, which we've put around the cover with, I think there's 90 recommendations from Monocle of places to eat, things to see, shops, streets, buildings, architecture that look to scratch at the surface and maybe tell you, even if you live here, a few things that you might not have known. But then also Gucci's creative director has picked 5 places that really, really meant something to him as well. So in that sense, it's a proper collaboration. They've given their input. We wouldn't try and design a clothing collection for them. Luckily, they didn't try and write the whole guidebook for us. And we've ended up with something that I don't think either of us could have created on our own. And it's a very beautiful product. And have you flicked through, Fernando?
I did. I think I love the form. It's not too big, it's perfect.
A6.
I love that. But Josh, as I have you here, you need to talk about all the other products. There's a new companion out, the Monocle France Handbook. And the new companion, I love the cover. Baby Blue is in.
It's been an incredible 6 months for Monocle because we still are going to meetings with luxury brands. We're still going to meetings with banks. We're still going to meetings with local governments. We're still going to meetings with security companies. And despite the pressure on lots of publishers, particularly publishers of our size that don't have a big, inexhaustible fund of cash behind them to do things, we need to make sure everything's grittily commercial. And you know what? There is money to be made in print. We'll take the companion, the cover of which you like. We launched the first one in 2022. 2 have been with Rolex. This latest one's with a French building company called Saint-Gobain. We were able to tell their story within the advertorial pages, but also publish 50 essays about the future of the city. What an amazing opportunity. I take it you've read my essay, Fernando.
I did.
Written from the perspective of a park bench.
That's a very good one. That was a very good one, Josh.
Maybe I could do a dramatic reading for the stack in future.
Why not? We actually had a reading of Companion last week. Stella Roos, she wrote an ode to the kiosk. I think it fitted the stack perfectly.
Listen up, listeners. It's coming your way.
Thank you very much, Josh. You can pay a visit to the Monocle Café in London's Chiltern Street and buy our latest companion book and France Handbook on monocle.com. Well, that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Dewars. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. We're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. You can also subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.